You get a lot of similar things, I think, in any field, like music, gear. You know, you have people who can play and will sound great through anything, and then you have people who seem to just want to buy their way out of whatever problem, and just have these insane rigs, but they don't sound particularly good, or they just want to show you like how they've set it up, or in any field or interest or hobby, I'm sure you have the full spectrum. I just tend to be more on the experience side. I don't really care for the attention from it, but sort of, I consider it a price that you pay to be able to enjoy vehicles. Like, I like the engineering and the driving experiences that they can unlock. Very much like a nice like what's your main instrument?
Right now, it's actually more than ever. Funny enough, it's been guitar.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, so if you have like a nice guitar, there's something about a nice guitar that could just make riffs happen, or you just get in the zone a little quicker. And it's not that you couldn't with a worse guitar, but like a nice guitar is just like, it feels like an extension of yourself. Like when it's a really, really good guitar that you love, and it's more about the experience, less than like, oh, this has, mahogany on it or whatever. So it's always chasing that similar thing where it's just less about the specs or what you could show off or show off to your friends, and more about the personal experience.
Yeah, there's no two ways about it. I will say, it's like, if I'm walking around in my surf shorts and stuff, and then I put on a suit, when I put on the suit, your shoulders do kind of pop up a little bit. You kind of feel good about walking around. If you're going to pick up a really nice guitar that not only, of course, has to feel good in your hands, but if it's also something that is like, I'm an old composer, not a rich composer. So when I see some of these guitars from like Music Man or Ibanez or stuff like that, there is a
You have to say Jackson. You have to
Jackson,
legally
sorry.
say Jackson.
Mahalo. Sorry, dude. Jackson people. Please give me the old man pass, because I'm not, and Jackson, stuff like that. There's such beautiful guitars out there. Oh, look at that. You see, now that, I know nothing about guitars, but that to me looks like...
This will speak to you.
Yes.
Because this looks like a dad rock guitar. I'm not saying anything. I'm not
That's
saying.
the second one, bro. That's
I know. Third strike in my out.
We're only 5 minutes into this thing, and you've given me the people's elbow.
I need to chill out.
Hit me with it.
I mean this in the best way, because I love a good Strat, and like I started to buy like relic Strats, things that look like that they came from the 60s but kind of modernized in how they play. And this is sort of the ultimate distillation of that, because it's like it looks like just sort of a traditional Strat, but it actually plays like my very modern guitars. It has a lot of specs, so it's kind of a sleeper. Because we'll play some of our heaviest songs, and I'll be playing this, and it looks almost anachronistic, but it actually will be perfectly fine for that. But it's also got like 2 single coils, and you can get quite a wide range of sounds by design. But yeah, this is a really heavy sounding guitar. I've used it for some of the heaviest stuff that we've done.
Yeah, and I've been really interested because I've been using, I'm a single coil guy, and not because I'm a guitarist that chases tones and stuff like that, but my career as a composer is a plug and go, do my job, knock the tracks out. Nowadays, in the last 15 years, using, plugins like I've been supporting your friends. I've got the Nolly Neural DSP. I've also got
there we go.
Yes, I also have the Get Good Drums. I have his very first one that came out.
Yeah, well, that's my company as well. With those guys, I'm one of the owners there. So thank you.
And then I got the up version of it. There was a couple of versions you guys released. One I think was a I guess maybe your first version, and then there's another one that came out.
I'll make you a deal. If you can name the product, I will give you any GGD product you want. Moving on.
You're kicking my ass. What are we gonna do? I'm gonna sit there and get over my cell phone.
Everything we make for free. You have 5, 4, 3. No rush.
Get Good Drums. There was I'm sorry.
I'm just joking.
You hit me so.
Anyways.
Oh, thanks.
Composers need all that stuff. We'll hook you up with all.
Thank you, dude. That's cool. I just got chicken skin. That's Hawaii for goosebumps. But thank you, man. That is so kind of you. Thank you. But I do have the Get Good Drums. There's 2 versions. I have the Nolly's version of Neural DSP, and for me, that's more than enough. And being that I don't know tones like the tones that you guys create, or actually the new movement of metal. I guess we're in our podcast now, buddy.
We're in.
So the sounds of metal, as an old guy who's very new to the rock scene, doing my channel, that my very first reaction thingy, and I've been enamored with the drop tuning what you can do with a drop tuning that I never knew as a guitar player.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I had mentioned in a video I did just a little bit ago, my very first actual drop tune thing that I did was a few years ago when the publisher said, hey man, these kids are doing this chuggy stuff, and can you do some of this? We need about 5 tracks that sound a little like, and so I didn't know what to look for. And the first video I looked at was like, drop D, how do I do this? Was one that Nick Nocturnal had put out. Nick had put out like heavy riffs in drop D and stuff, and I went, wow! I mean, I shit you not, full old man mind blown, gray matter everywhere. And because even as a guy my age who doesn't really, you think you're not growing with influences, I've been completely reshaped and re-influenced by this journey that has taken me through your band and all the bands and stuff that I've listened to on my channel. So, but I've been really enamored with that chuggy, wiry, deep gent sound that you guys create. And of course, I did the noob mistake number 1. I found out I got Nolly's version of DSP, and I cranked everything. I go, it's not sounding chuggy. It's sounding very dusty. So there's a magic behind that, yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because in some ways, very, very recently, people started down tuning in any significant way. Like for the majority of the guitar, let's call it, it's been pretty much tuned in a similar range, 6 strings and whatever. Mm-hmm. And you might do drop tunings and whatever, but really dropping the tuning down heavily is kind of a more modern thing. And I've really analyzed this in detail. Like what happened at first was people would sort of detune their guitars, and then the strings get all like sort of floppy, and they have a lot of attack. They actually sound pretty good, but it's very hard to maintain tuning. So then the logical thought is, let me get some thicker strings, right? And then what happens then is your guitar starts to sound pretty woofy because these thicker strings are like starting to throw a lot of low end frequencies. The tonal center and like the frequencies that these notes are hitting are actually lower, and the front end of amps are not really designed or not really ever expecting that. It's kind of like throwing a bass into there or something, right?
I got you.
And a lot more low end, and so it gets woofy when you start to palm mute. Instead of being like chick chick chick, it's like whoa, 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 whoa. And you're just like, oh, this is really really kind of dark sounding. And I know there was a lot of people who started to get into 7-string guitars who are like, this is cool, and I appreciate the added range because it's a lower B or whatever you want to tune it to. Mm-hmm. But they were like, it just sounds so dull, and I just can't get it to sound sharp. And this is where like boosting and like things like precision drive and all those things came into play, because basically it's a pedal that'll effectively cut that low end back out, so the front end of the amp isn't just getting too much low end, it's getting more of a balanced signal, and that gets you that stringy sort of attack sound that you're talking about. But yeah, it's something that has to be deliberately chased, and if you don't really know about it, you might be setting in and be like, wow, why does this sound so dusty, as you said. Right. So there are some tricks to it. It's not quite as straightforward to just tune low and get that sort of sound. And then with that, there's a community of people sort of chasing it and exploring all sorts of different ways to do that. And we're very picky about how that sounds. Yeah. I myself am no exception there. Like, I'm extremely picky. Sort of refine your chugging or palm muting technique. To really accent it, like how close to the bridge are you, or are you choking up a little bit closer to the neck so that the notes have a bit more attack, or am I changing my position? Like now in riffs, like that'll just be changing. So I'm very aware where my right hand is, and it's such a big part of how you sound on guitar. So all of this, long story long, is that it's all very deliberate, and there's a lot of elements coming into place because in some ways the guitar isn't really designed to do that. The amps aren't supposed to do that, and you're sort of appropriating all the gear and using it in a way to where it all works. But it's to sort of solve a problem, because they won't inherently sound very good when they're tuned low.
Well, I think it's also because of the last couple decades, the metal generations. I'm not saying that right. The last couple of decades of progress in the production of metal are also pushing the technical aspects of the genres, as well as the arrangement and composition aspects of the genre. And I think the geekiness, that rabbit hole that we all fall down in so many different sectors that are like within it. Like for instance, you're talking about the right hand aspect. I am more, of a jazz fusion type of player, blues like Robin Ford style. And I say that lightly. He's a 10, I'm a 2. But those are like my styles. When all of a sudden I started listening to this channel and there was a lot of that speed and the riff going on there, my fingers, my brains and everything understood it. I could play it, but I realized just how important the techniques were once you start getting all that, gain in there and you're starting to crush everything with the pedals and stuff. How if I say this, I might sound like a new guitar player, but how much more noisier my playing seemed to have gotten, obviously, because if you're down, you don't have any gain or anything, you can get away with maybe just a slight little, dusty mute on it, but then all of a sudden, you kick it up to 11, you start hearing things, and then I would start getting intimidated, like, this is loud, this is very crazy, this is, but...
Yeah, it's interesting, because you'll hear this thing with guitarists, and it's sort of a half-truth, which is like, practice on a clean channel, because gain can cover up mistakes. It's effectively compression. So, you don't need the same sort of finger strength or attack. Mm-hmm. You don't need to pick as hard, and it'll cover up mistakes. It'll sort of like turn everything into slop in a way where you won't be able to audit that you're not linking your left and right hand together. However, if you just do that, you'll never learn to mute, because you never have to manage the gain. So actually, it's good to play with some gain, maybe not too much gain, but it's good to play with like a good amount of gain that you would intend to play with, because then you will learn how to play clean as well, how to mute and how to place your hands so that it's not too loud or too noisy, which is a skill that needs to be learned. And you'll find that people who just play on the clean channel, it takes them some time to adjust, because they've never really had to build those habits.
Yeah, that's very well said. Do you actually have a course?
No. I can't teach guitar to save my life.
Well,
I need to take lessons.
Well, sometimes it's not necessarily, sometimes it could be little tidbits. I used to teach, not anymore, but I used to teach ukulele to, to kids and stuff like that, or people. I do a lot of nonprofit work, so I was teaching at a nonprofit place, like a public housing area. And one of the things that I taught the very first ukulele people who held was the sensitivity of the left hand or your fretting hand. You're not pressing so hard and stuff like that. And then I released this one video I had another nonprofit channel about that, and I had guitar players leaving me comments, oh my God, if my teacher would have only told me that. Yeah. Just that pressure, and the fidelity and the finesse, because when I watch you guys play, especially those who are extremely talented, the members in your band and just Gazooka numbers of musicians, is the finesse and the light-handedness of what it looks like. There isn't digging, and especially when it comes into speed.
You can't do that. You can't do that, because your note will go sharp, and and I wouldn't even say I'm great at this. I have some friends who are really phenomenal at this, like sort of economy of motion. So you'll see, like one of my friends, Wes Hauk, who's just a phenomenal guitarist. He'll be playing extremely technical stuff, but it'll look like his fingers are barely moving. It's just a complete economy of motion. And then with the right hand, I do tend to pick pretty hard, because I find a lot of the tone comes through that. And then you can sort of use your right hand as a volume control, even with gain. Like, I don't always use as much gain as people think I do. It's a lot like using a very dynamic pickup and the right hand to sort of get it out of there. I find that very satisfying. So yeah, kind of light on the left hand and heavy on the right hand.
Yeah, that's cool. I learned my lesson quickly. When I was so taken aback by my journey with the Decomposer Lounge, that I went out and I bought just a rack Music Man 7-string, just literally off of Amazon. I said, okay, well, I'm just going to do this, and then I had a friend of mine do the setup and change the strings and stuff, and I did not dial in that darker sound. But what I did last year, and what to me is just so wonderful, I did like 5 or 6 guitar backing tracks for that channel as a composer, saying, okay, well, I think this is what it might sound like and stuff, so I'm going to try it. And I got really nice, people are very nice to the old man, going, oh, nice, Geebz, that's a nice little chugging attempts you got going over there. But I soon realized the unique finesse and technical aspects it takes to get sounds that are the quality sounds of today that you're talking about, and the kind of time and energy that goes into and engineering, because you and I are both engineering geeks.
But I think the geek part is like kind of, or the nerd part is really the through line, because I think it's like an archetypal thing. Like there's probably just a kind of like nerdy human. You put them in any scenario and they'll just approach it with that same sort of tenacity. So, for example, that same part of my brain that when I'm playing a video game, and how's that for a segue?
Very good.
but like when I'm playing a video game, like I'm struggling with a boss, I'm like, just one more time, then I can't do it. Then the next day I'm coming back and practicing and start learning and iterating until I get it. It's the same part of my brain that'll do that when I'm practicing a guitar part or learning an engineering skill. And there's people who will be like, it's good enough. I got what I wanted out of that, and that's cool. And then there's people who are like, no, I must conquer this, And I think that is the way that I approach a lot of things, or maybe everything in my life. And it's why in this scene that sort of requires, a cursory understanding of the engineering side of things, and also some enough technical prowess to actually navigate a lot of the stuff that we're writing and playing and whatever, right? Because it's just kind of part of the style. All of that stuff kind of makes sense to a person like me, and it makes sense in the context of video games or any other hobbies where you just go way too deep into it and you really do stick with it and have this borderline obsessive quality about it.
Yeah, and that was a very nice segue. Thank you very much. The video game aspect of it. I think, we started firing off on guitar techie stuff, and I'm just like, we can goober on forever on this and probably have to do another live cast for that. Before I do want to kind of take us back a little bit for the beginning of your journey with music, and I guess I can ask the same basic questions that when I'm getting to learn about somebody. What was your first instrument?
First instrument would be piano, reluctantly. I think
you must take lessons, son.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, big.
Was that what it was?
Yeah. I think my mom came from a very poor family, and like she had always wanted to learn the violin and just never had the means. So, sort of vicariously living through me, like, and we could take piano lessons for cheap. And I think what happened was we were at a friend's house, and like I sat at the piano and showed some sort of sense for melody. I don't remember, but I think that's where they're like, oh, maybe we should get him some music lessons, And I don't know, when you're a kid and you're just told to do something that isn't watching TV or playing outside.
Rebel, you must rebel.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, if you play 30 minutes of piano, you can watch 30 minutes of TV, that kind of thing.
Well, look how that worked out.
Well, it didn't work out very well because I hated it. I hated piano.
Shit, sorry.
I did for many years. I did for many years, and it just didn't pay attention to it. It was just a chore. It was literally a chore.
Got it.
I think like I started to become like somewhat proficient by the time I was, I would say like 9 or 10 years old, and I started to learn like some music theory then, like how to read music and whatever.
Oh, okay, yeah. But not formal theory, not the formal study, but the fact that you were actually learning to read and read and play.
But I was so bad at it. I was so bad at reading, and I always got a lot of crap from my teachers because they were like, "You're just listening," because they would always like play it first, like hum it. They could. I was always judged. They could like look at a piece of sheet music and be like, and I'm like, "Oh, that's so cool." But I didn't realize I was just relying on my ear for everything. So I was always playing things by ear, and they could always tell. They're like, "You're not reading, you're listening." So it didn't come naturally to me, and I hated it. I hated reading music, and it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And it was always like, this is very stupid when I could just use my ear, but I have to do it their way. And then I think if I'd like just stuck with it a bit more, maybe I would have learned. But it was very much like a test that you study for, and then the second I didn't have to take lessons anymore, it just purged it all from my mind. So I was probably a better piano player earlier in my life than I am now. I can navigate around it, but I'm not good. I wouldn't mind getting a piano actually and like trying to get a little better. Maybe now.
There's nothing like having some real ivory underneath there.
No, but my mom was always like, "You'll thank me later in life," and I'm like, "Yeah, 30 years later, I suppose."
And you still have another
know.
30 years to go. By the time you get to my age, trust me, you're going to thank her even more.
Well, there we go. There
a
we
little
go.
old man wisdom. You'll cycle back into that, and you go, "Oh my God,
I'll
my
be like,
mom was
you were both right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, did
yeah.
you at some point? I think I read somewhere that you kind of drifted into drums. Like, did you chill out a piano and then have a little downtime for yourself, and then naturally kind of?
No, what I should mention is part of my frustration with piano was that, like, even at 5 years old, I knew I wanted to learn to play drums. I knew that.
Oh.
But that was the last instrument my parents would ever get me. Of course, like, and
all
I don't
that
blame
noise.
them. In hindsight, I don't blame them. And I always had like a passing interest in guitar, like electric guitar,
Right?
Because it was always so mysterious. Didn't know what distortion was or what that sound was, but that sound I was like, wow, it's crazy. Why does it sometimes? Is it how he's playing it that makes it sound like that? Like, what is it? I didn't know about distortion or anything, so I just thought it was very fascinating. But drums really like captured my soul from day one. And
okay, so hang on for a second.
Yeah.
So that right there to me now kind of fills in a little bit of I wonder where he's getting his rhythmical values from in his compositions.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff like
No,
that.
big time.
So with the drums, I know. Okay, so you're 5 years old. You're wishing you had drums, but were you a kid that tapped out stuff in school, or like you're like tapping the desk and the teacher's going, "Sure, stop that."
I don't think I did. I don't think. You know what I did? Which now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever really talked about it before. I used to just drum in my mouth, like with my teeth.
Oh my God, I do that. I catch so much shit for that even to this day.
I don't do it anymore. I don't, and it's weird because I kind of remembered the other day that I used to do that. I used to do it like obsessively, but it was the only way to like remember drums. It was the only method, and I think now that I have other ways, I could just think about it. But I didn't know anything about drums. I didn't know what a kick drum or a snare drum. I just knew them as a concept.
Right.
And I always loved drums. Always loved drums. So I think I would just drum in my mouth with my teeth. I didn't even know that people could hear it, but like in your head you can hear it. I'm sure it must have looked insane to people.
No, you do. It's a little clicking thing for myself. I don't know about you, but I had a different tone for a different movement in my jaw. As a matter of fact, I catch a lot
different teeth.
Yes.
Different teeth for
Oh shit! I catch a lot of funky comments that I'm always moving my mouth when I listen to music on my channels, and that's because I'm listening, and my uncle and my father, who are also composers and stuff, had their own physical things they would do when they listened to music. But for me, when I listen to music, I guess I'm always doing something like,
yeah.
And I'm trying to like, now of course today's with, Beat Blast, it's not going to happen. I won't have any teeth left. I won't have any fucking teeth left. But I'm just saying,
can't do that.
They'll be putting me away in an ambulance for that one.
I don't think he's okay.
Right. More drugs.
Yeah, right.
But how cool, how crazy that is. So you love drums. You're starting off with piano. After you were done with piano, what was?
So here's the story. Is I'm Jewish and I was raised pretty strict, and you have a bar mitzvah when you're 13. Yeah, exactly. And like and I hated being Jewish, but like the one thing that was good is that you got a bar mitzvah, which after that you're a man, so you don't have to follow it anymore.
And you don't have to eat gefilte fish anymore. You just
I'm done with all this. but I got a little bit of money from some family members, which you're supposed to use to study the Torah or whatever, which is totally what I did. No, I bought a drum set and a guitar with that and a PS1. Because my parents wouldn't buy any of that stuff for me. But,
and a PS1.
Yeah. I knew I wanted video games and instruments. And that's what I used my bar mitzvah money on. And then I had for the drum set, like we had these like pads you're supposed to put on it to make it quiet, which totally doesn't
the little rubber
work.
Pads and stuff.
Like I would take them off, and my mom would be like, "Misha, stop it! You're shaking the house apart!" So I was such a little punk,
like a Cheech and Chong moment right there.
I was so happy. Oh God, I love the drums so much, and I didn't really ever take lessons for it, but like just learning from friends or like what I'd hear or just trying to figure stuff out. It came with an instructional video too, which I watched pretty religiously.
What kind of a kit was it?
It was a Tama Rockstar.
So okay, they're a jamming band.
Yeah, it was solid. It was inexpensive. You know, it was an entry level kit. Didn't cost too much money, and it was my way. And I think, did I get a double pedal with it? Forget if I did.
It wouldn't surprise me if you did, just because.
I think I did. I think I did get a double pedal because I was like, I want to.
Because you wanted more cowbell. God dang it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I just knew a lot of the bands I liked were using double kick drums and things like that. So that was great.
That's a perfect segue for me, because my next question that has to do with the drums. And then obviously piano was just kind of this kind of Heimlich maneuver thing that the parents put on you, so that but then you probably didn't know it, but already developing, your ear and stuff.
Credit where credit's due. My mom was probably right, but I was very, very stubborn about it at the time.
Of course. But when you got into your drums, now you said you had like a little, how to, or maybe, starters, kind of how to do things. What and because I'm thinking, hang on for a second, let me do the math here. You were born, so now we're talking 2001 or 2 that you got your kit.
No, I was a little younger than that, right before, in the late 90s. Yeah.
So who are your influences then? Now that's. Oh
yeah, this is big. So at the time, when I was like 13 or 14, I was really into like nu metal. I liked Korn and Limp Bizkit and stuff like that. But there are some bands, I don't really listen to them so much nowadays, but there are some bands that sort of withstood the test of time. Deftones being one of them. Deftones, massive influence, still a massive influence. Still, those albums just are perfect. The Incubus from that era, I really liked, like Make Yourself, and Science and Make Yourself.
Yeah, I did a Science track a while ago. It's been a while, but oh my gosh, what a
Whew. It's pretty wild.
Yeah,
and the drumming's great on there, and then Tool, which was like pretty wild. I just started getting into Slipknot, and I was like, oh my god, that's the fastest drummer I've ever heard. And then, funny enough, so that kit came with a VHS tape with John Tempesta, Kenny Aronoff, and a gentleman by the name of Mike Portnoy, who played with this incredible band called Dream Theater. And that was a game changer. That guy and that guy, he was on the video. I was like, that's who I want to play like him. Right. And he was playing a lot of like double kick stuff, and like, one thing I like about Mike Portnoy is his concepts aren't necessarily super difficult. It's just how they're implemented is really crazy. So some of the stuff I could sort of do or learn. So these were like pretty useful lessons. I mean, I couldn't really play any of that stuff, but it's stuff that stuck with me. And then like getting into Dream Theater was like a bit of a game changer there, because it was like, oh, I didn't know you were allowed to play drums like that.
You weren't allowed to.
You're not allowed to. And it's like, oh, you are, and then you're allowed to do that on recording. And then, when you see them live, surely they're not. No, they're just as tight live. Wow. Okay, cool. So this is now the bar.
And how long was it that you get the sticks in your hand, you're in front of the kit? Now, intrinsically, or without a doubt, people do have a super. Or there are people that have a natural ability to do very rhythmical things. Like, we're wired a little differently and stuff like that. I mean, obviously, you said when you were a kid, the first thing that came to mind to you as an instrument was drums, and that's because somewhere inside of you there was somewhere.
Yeah.
So taking that and then putting yourself in front of a kit, how long was it before you were actually playing complete songs, through, if you're listening to it?
It wasn't. It's hard to remember, but it's funny because I think I really struggled with odd timings and things like that at first. I remember in my school there was a music class, and I took it, and one of the assignments was write a song in an odd timing, and I failed it because I couldn't do it. It's kind of funny to think about.
Now you call up the professor and say, look at what I'm doing now.
Are you proud of me?
Are you proud of me now? You still haunt me right before
It's pretty funny. But I wouldn't say there was like, I wouldn't say like it came easily, but it also was something that I was just so excited to have the opportunity to just learn about this. And I've always been kind of I won't read the manual. Just kind of jump in and just see what happens. So it was fun.
Kind of like how you do with your piano teacher, right? You didn't quite read everything. You just kind of played
with
by
everything.
ear.
Just kind of jump in and see what happens. And it was fun. There was no goal. I wasn't learning drums to like. There was no end to that sentence. It was just drums are awesome. It makes me feel very happy to play them. So I'm going to play them. And I don't have to be good at them. It was just a very enjoyable thing that I wasn't really allowed to do for most of my life. And then, then you start playing with your friends in middle school and high school and whatever. I guess that would be high school then. Whatever. My memory's bad. But like, I had some friends I played with.
Wait till you get to my age, buddy.
No, it's every year is worse and worse. Don't worry. But like, but the funny thing that no one tells you about being a drummer is that like gear is very heavy and everyone goes to the drummer's house, right?
Right.
So the guitarists always come to your place with the intention of bringing all their stuff home, and at the end of a long practice day they're like, I'll just leave it there. So I got all these guitars and amps just donated to me just because they're like left there, and I got to play around. And then the guy I was playing with at the time had a 7-string guitar and a high gain amp, and I was like, cool. I don't need to buy those, I suppose. And he had a 4-track tape recorder and microphones.
So somebody just moved into studio and toys for you.
Basically, yeah, it was great because like I wouldn't, my parents weren't going to buy that for me, and I didn't have money, so like this was kind of, it was kind of nice to have that, and he didn't mind leaving it there, so that's where I'd start to like futz around on the guitar and whatever. But it was always, I'd call it more utilitarian. Like I wanted to play guitar well enough so if I like jam something on drums, I could like play some guitar to it. It was very like Deftonesy, like very simple kind of stuff. Like I never really focused on sort of being proficient at guitar at that point. For me, like it was clear that if I ever played any instrument, it was going to be drums and drums only.
Wow, that's great. So now, like I mentioned to you before we started this, I wanted to kind of parallel your forward musicianship and everything with your video game world and life and stuff like that. Because how funny is it that that in the trajectory of your career, your creative life to this point, they have kind of intertwined. So before we get to those places, at that point, were you already geeking out on video games?
Yeah, because I had that PlayStation, and actually,
oh, that's right, the bar mitzvah. I'm
gonna tell you a really interesting turning point. Because I look back, I don't know if you ever look back on your lines at these forks in the road, and you're like, my life
all day long,
pretty different. And in preparation, I knew that I was going to be getting some money from my bar mitzvah, and I knew I'd probably get enough to buy myself a console. And I had to decide, and the choice was between Nintendo 64 and PlayStation. And I was 110% sure I was going to buy a Nintendo 64 because it was a more advanced system. It had 3D gaming, it had Mario, it had GoldenEye, it had all these things. I was playing it at my friend's house, and I was like, this is what I'm going to buy. Certainly. I'd bought magazines, Nintendo 64 magazines, to see all the games that I was going to
buy. You were in it.
I was in it. I was so excited. I finally had a chance to get a console. And then literally like right before I think I was going to buy it, went to a friend's house and he had a PlayStation, and I played like an hour of Final Fantasy VII. And I was like, I'm buying a PlayStation.
Oh, I see. All right, yeah, that's the crossover right there. So, but just for my head, because I'm really new at the video game OST, and the video game people have been so kind to me. Fantasy VII was a release more when you were getting into the games, but Final Fantasy's been around for a long time before that.
Yeah, right? But Final Fantasy VII was kind of this seminal game in sort of modern gaming. It was the first three-dimensional Final Fantasy game. It was one of the most popular role-playing games of all time. It was, like Japanese role-playing games. It sort of popularized the genre in America.
Okay, got that. So isn't that the same time that kind of also Halo came out with or Bungie came out with Halo?
I think Halo was a little bit later. That was a little bit later. That was the next generation of console. This was like kind of Nintendo 64 versus PlayStation, and the point is that like if I'd gone down the Nintendo route, I would have never played Final Fantasy. I would have never discovered one of my favorite composers of all time. I can say that with some confidence because I could afford one console. Like I would have had awareness of Final Fantasy and the phenomenon, but I would not have gotten a chance to play it till much later. At which point maybe it wouldn't have hit me the way that it did, you know. But instead, I got to play that game, which became instantly one of my favorite games, and it's a very long game. It'll take you about anywhere from 40 to 60 hours of gameplay to complete it. And throughout that time, you're hearing all this music and variations.
And who would
themes.
that composer be?
Nobuo Uematsu.
I'm learning. That's incredible work, man.
One of my favorite composers of all time. Absolute musical genius. Self-taught. I don't think he knows theory either. Yeah, he's just a beast of a guy. Composes, 3 to 4 hours of music for a video game, and I love how thematic it was. Like, there's these motifs all over the place, floating around, coming back, and when you hear it in a different context, you're getting chills, because you're like, oh my god, like, oh, that's and the music can say so much, and man, you hear it so much, like, it's got nostalgic value. I will still tear up if I hear Aerith's theme from Final Fantasy VII. It's a beautiful theme. It's a beautiful theme, but like,
I'll have to check it out.
I don't think, like, they did the remake, they did an orchestral version. I can't make it through that song without tearing up, and anyone who's played 7 will probably have difficulty. It's so just ingrained in how you feel and brings up so many emotions.
Well, I think one of the unique things that you're talking about is that maybe you and I went through the same kind of transition, except a 25-year difference in age, is because I never grew up as a composer. I was very lucky. I lived a very kind of young life and stuff, because I never got married, never bought a house, never had kids or anything, and my whole family career didn't take off until I moved back here to Hawaii in the 2000s. But I had the same exact emotional feeling when a friend of mine says, you got to check out this game, Halo. All right, so I buy the console, and as I started playing and getting involved, the music, it was so unique that I would play a game. I'm entrenched in campaigns and stuff, but to recognize the music, I think, to the point that we do, is such a double joy, and at that time, for you had not had. This is perfect segue. The universe is with us. Is this where you started absorbing some of your influences for what ended up being you writing?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow,
so,
I wasn't aware.
I'm going to say this for the record, that Misha Mansoor was influenced by video game music that took him into the arrangements that we hear orchestrally in the Periphery.
Without a doubt.
Okay.
And I say this all the time. Like, people say we sound like Meshuggah, and we do, because Meshuggah is my favorite band. But people don't realize how influenced I am by Nobuo Uematsu, and how much he's just as much, if not in some cases and some songs, more than Meshuggah or anyone else. And it's kind of like saying that maybe another Final Fantasy or Nobuo fan would recognize, but people on the outside wouldn't know where that's coming from, or they might mistake it for something else. Massive influence. And this is also at a point in time, they always say, like, when you're 13 or 14, that's kind of like what determines what you'll like. But I also wasn't trying to be a musician then, like, not in any concrete capacity. I was just enjoying the process of learning instruments and whatever. So it wasn't like, let me absorb this music so that I can, put it in.
Sure.
And, like,
it wasn't intentional.
No, not at all. And it's more in hindsight, I'm like, oh yeah, like, this has really influenced my sensibility and what I like and what I like to hear and what I find satisfying, So it's more like something I can observe in hindsight, just how much of an influence he was, because at the time it didn't feel like it. It was just like, oh, I love the music in Final Fantasy games.
Well, that's how influences usually creep in and work. I think, for me, I had a different kind of a setup because I come from an entertainment family. I'm a third-generation composer. It's almost like if you were the son of a plumber and your dad had every single tool in his shed and you knew how to make everything, that for me it was kind of ironically kind of a passive part of my life, right? Dad, what do you want me? Oh, I'm going to take violin lessons. I'm going to take piano lessons and stuff, and drums and all kinds of stuff. But it wasn't. I didn't get my real true influence until I pulled the full-on Jeff Spicoli move. And what that was is that I graduated high school in '79, but I was a bit of a burn and a surfer. That's just what I was, but music was around me. But in my 10th grade of registering, I promise I'll get somewhere with this, registering for high school, I was baked. I fully forgot registration day, and I couldn't get this one period covered. And so what ended up happening is the only course that was left was advanced choir. And regardless of the kind of work my father and uncle were writing in the studio, my biggest influence was passive and kind of an accident after doing 3 years of advanced choral works as a singer. I didn't even know I had a voice. And they tested me out. I was the second tenor and everything. And then all of a sudden I'm remembering some sight reading stuff from when I was younger, but I'm looking at Bernstein and all kinds of other compositions in my high school years. And somehow, some way, I had no idea on how powerful that would be in my later years as a composer. Kind of like you're playing video games, you're listening to the music, it's influencing you, but you don't quite have an idea yet until you get older where that has an impact on your compositions later. And that's exactly what happened to me, is that those 3 years of high school, choral and stuff, better sight reading, but a deeper understanding of harmonies and, syncopations, unique meter times and stuff, depending on what composer we were, doing works on, ends up becoming such a big part of our palette of choices as we become composers as we get older.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting and something that you can only really appreciate after the fact. But although all this stuff like the drums and the guitars and playing with my friends eventually led to this idea of like, oh, it'd be great to do music. It didn't even feel like a responsible thought. I was like, I can't even play this instrument.
Right.
So I was just discovery. Everything was just discovery at that point. It just felt like a door was open and you just get to see what's in this room. And that to me was the most exciting thing. It was just like, get to find out. I don't know anything. It's wonderful.
Very video game like, right? You go down the tunnel or you open that door, you don't know that's on that side.
Go explore.
Until you explore, and you have to do it a few times and stuff. So as you're moving forward with this journey, you've got this great relationship with the video games, and you're just having a great time, but at the same token you're getting subliminally schooled, as yet you do not know that you will be using those skills later. At some point, since technology had come around in the early 2000s, it was a lot more inexpensive than in my days in the 80s, when the first DX7, the 108s, the Oberheims. My first computer was an Atari 1040 ST, and that's when MIDI first came out.
No kidding.
That's how far back I go. You got a job when you were young. I remember we talked briefly for a half a second that you got a job at Radio Shack.
Radio Shack, yeah.
Well, my first job was a little teeny music store, to shit you not, called Guitar Center. That was at the corner of Ventura and Kester. It was the size of a shoebox before they got really huge.
That's the original Guitar Center?
I don't know if I think the original Guitar Center was in Chicago or something, but
it's like it's before they blew up.
Totally. Wow. As a matter of fact, the manager who fired me, the GM of that store was a guy named Rich, and he ended up, I think, being the president or the CEO of it later down the years for 25 years. But
wow.
But I had an Atari. My dad had built his studio. I had come back from 2 years living here in Hawaii because my mom lives here. So that's my story, just briefly, when people go, how did you get to Hawaii? And I kind of had this two things from a divorce. Dad stayed in West Coast. Mom came back here to Hawaii. And I did a short little trip. And me and my dad were kind of at each other's throats. You shouldn't go be a surfer, you bum. You're a musician. You should do that. No, Dad, I want to. So I come back and I go, oh, shit, Dad was right.
Just wait a second. So your dad's saying you should go out and be a musician.
Dude, this is a whole different podcast. If you heard,
you know what I would have given to have my parents yelled at me?
See, I knew I was going to open that shit up wide open.
Oh man!
You know what?
Fun little fact. I worked at Radio Shack because I applied for Guitar Center and they didn't want me.
No shit. How could that be?
Don't know. Didn't get the job.
Well, okay, look, I'll make this really simple, and I don't take this for granted, but I never wanted to be a composer. And what happened is this, I'll make it really fast. From 0 to 18, studio going on, all kinds of productions, all kinds of famous producers and musicians coming through my dad's house for arrangements and stuff like that, and they would write and play. My uncle's in a very successful Latin jazz fusion band called Caldera. They did 4 albums out of Capitol, but it was hardcore fusion, a la Weather Report and stuff like that, rehearsed sometimes in the studio. I was constantly surrounded by music, but I didn't care. And it was the weirdest thing. I guess I was just really interested in surfing and girls. Why bother, right? I'm a teenager, right?
Right.
And I had lessons. My dad tried to give me lessons for drums. He gave me lessons from Joe Procaro Sr. I had a couple lessons. Ralph Humphrey from Zappa had a couple lessons. Even Ralph Humphrey had said to me, "Hey, Geebz, check it out. We're opening up this new school in Hollywood called Musicians Institute. You want to come and hang out?" I go, "No, I'm going to go to Hawaii." I mean, I did that. It was something.
I guess when it's there and it's not a big deal, you know, it's accessible. Like for me, like music and drums and all this was like this impossible thing, and I finally got my hands on it. So it was like I'm gonna just. But if it was just there, maybe I would have felt different about it. If it was just this thing that my dad did, like, I mean, whatever your dad does is never that cool, you know?
But I didn't know any better. I mean, I thought, well, you know, my dad would disappear on holidays because my dad was doing stuff in the 50s and 60s, which was big band leaders.
Oh, okay,
so you know, he was really big in the Vegas scene. I've got some great pictures of his names and lights, you know, at the Tropicana and stuff under these huge names, conducted by and all that sort of stuff. I didn't know any better. My mother was a singer and an actress, so I was raised in kind of a entertainment family.
Yeah.
So you know, getting up at 8, going to school, and then Dad, we'd have to be really quiet because Dad'd be sleeping because he gigged all night long or something, or he'd be getting ready, or in the morning we'd have to be very quiet, you know. And then his recording studio was next to my bedroom, so I spent most of my life listening to my dad pluck out arrangements because remember, everything was pencil to paper. So my dad would be doing these arrangements for these big band things, and he'd be on the piano, and I'd go, "Mom, why is he constantly repeating notes and stuff?" And he goes, "That's because he does an arrangement, and then he hits the notes, and then he writes it on paper." Right. You know, so that's the kind of era that I came from. But I didn't understand what I have, and actually, I didn't understand what I had until the mid '80s, when I got that job at Guitar Center. Because when I came home from Hawaii, my dad was like, "Okay, well, what are you going to do with your life?" I go, "I don't know." So I said, "But I better get a job in the music, something, just to make, you know." But he had already built a little studio with the Atari 1040 ST, at DX7, a Juno 106, a Lindrum, little itty bitty console, the Tascam 8-track, and the whole thing. And this is 1983 or 4-ish.
Good Lord, man.
So by the time I went to the Guitar Center, I probably would have been rejected too, Misha, so don't feel bad. But the only reason why I think I got hired is because I walked into the keyboard section. I went, "Oh yeah, that's an Atari ST 1040. Hey, have you guys ever checked doing this with MIDI? You can loop this with this." And the salesman was like, "You're in, sign him up."
Yeah, that's great.
But I failed, and I got fired because I could not upsell. And I could not. I got fired because some lovely little old lady wanted to buy something called the S50 was a keyboard, one of the very first roll-in sample keyboards, because it sounded really nice, and her son wants to learn. And I'm like going, "Yeah, listen, this over here is $300. It's a Casio. Let's see if your son likes all this stuff first before we get him into this." "George, you'd like to see in the office, please?" Pew!
Yeah.
You know, but as a geek, my trajectory was the Atari 1040 ST, learning about MIDI, getting them all connected and stuff, and then that took me into an era where I started helping my dad and then some of his friends in recording sessions, and I started meeting more people, and then I fell off the wagon and I went back to Hawaii. I was like, I don't know if I found myself. And as I came back that time, I knew I had to up my game, so I got a job at a recording studio as a second engineer called Studio Sound in North Hollywood, and I got all my chops on analog, the Harrison, 24s. I had to learn how to line and repro machines, from back, and they very much like that documentary that the Foo Fighter drummer did on Sound City.
Yeah.
Studio Sound was the name of the studio I worked at. Was about 3 miles away from Sound City.
Yeah, wow.
So I learned, I got all my chops, and all of a sudden, now this is a podcast on me all of a sudden, I'm sorry. I'm telling you my story, but...
No, this is fascinating, man. This is like the life I wish I had.
No, but you see, this is why I humbly say what I'm saying, because I'm so grateful in hindsight that I had this journey. But what happened was, I worked for a notorious producer named George Tobin. If you mention that name anywhere in Hollywood, people would have gone, "Oh, dude, you survived." He was the one who produced Tiffany. I think we're alone now.
And he was a difficult producer?
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
I've just I don't know if he's with us anymore, but he was so difficult and so mean, but he was so pertinent to my journey. Like, I learned a lot from him. I mean, he literally cussed me out in front of about 15 people, artists, producers, office.
What were you doing for him when he was yelling at you?
I was his second engineer. So in other words, I was cleaning toilets, aligning machines, doing room setups for engineers who would come in and give me, the mic setups.
Right.
And then, of course, I'd have to clean after closing and stuff like that. Sometimes I'd be there for 2 days straight, sleeping on the couch in between 2 studios as a second engineer, because I was the only second engineer that was booked, or that was working in a studio that was literally almost booked 24/7. And so it was a lot of hazing. But even when he cussed me out in front of all these people, there was something about that like, I was ready to catch a case, as we like to say. But something about that was a learning lesson for me. And like, oh, you're going to say that about me in front of people here? All right, I got you. People afterwards are going, dude, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? No, we're good. But I learned a lot from Tobin. But here was the beautiful thing about that lesson. I worked with hundreds of bands and artists, learned all of my recording chops there. I worked, second engineers, Bruce Swadine, or whenever engineers came in, the second engineer would set things up and be very quiet. And, would be by the patch bay. So
you're there getting free lessons the whole time, basically.
Brah, you have no idea. I'm watching them
from
EQ.
Top quality.
I'm watching them EQ the kicks, different mics setups, and everything like that. And that's
making notes. Yeah, it's great.
And then this one day, this one very successful big engineer was doing a session. A guy named Roger Nichols was doing a session. He was almost like Bruce Swadine level, like Michael Jackson's engineer level and stuff. And so I'm sitting down. I'm being very quiet. There's a short little break in the session, and then. Everyone's cool. I'm sitting in the corner, and the guitar player, Paul Jackson Jr., was, I think, doing some overdubs or something, had turned to me and said, hey, Geebz, how you been? Because he would be called in a lot to do sessions at that studio from other producers. I go, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. And he goes, somebody else goes, so do you do music? I go, no, I'm just here. I'm learning everything. And I said, but my dad does, and his uncle, and my dad and my uncle do music and stuff. And, who are they? And I go, George and Eddie Del Barrio. And it was like somebody took their fingers across an album, and everybody turned to me and said, your father is George Del Barrio? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. Why? Are you kidding? The arrangements he did for this and this and that. And at that point was my turning point in my life, because I realized, this is what my dad does. This is what he's known for.
That's so funny.
Oh, I get it. Because my dad's career on his discography, if you look at his discography, it's massive, but it's a string arranger and orchestrator. So, his credits were always at the very bottom below craft food services in movies, but then in albums, you'd see strings by and strings by and strings by and stuff like that. And I had no idea, because he'd go off, and then half the time he didn't know the people he was writing for.
Right, he's just arranging.
My favorite story, and then we'll go on from here. This is the best story ever. And then we'll turn this back to focusing on you. Sorry, man, you got me lit up. I'm drinking coffee. So
you're unstoppable. Now I want to hear this.
No, this is a great story. My dad had a wonderful studio up in North LA County at the very top of a ridge, and at that point, I'm writing music with him, which was a great turning point in my life, where he and I finally bonded. And we're riding together and enjoying each other's company. I'm learning and stuff. And I come back from surfing. I'm surfing this little beach called Zuma, which is just down the way. I come back up to the house. I'm all salty and scurvy looking and stuff. And I pull my truck up, and I see another truck like mine up there. By the way, an original Bronco. Hello, thank you.
Nice.
And and I walk up, and as I'm walking up the driveway, my dad's studio was down about 150 feet in a ravine from the hill. It's this like 10-acre place he had, and it was down. And get up to the main house, and I walk up, and I go, hey, Dad, what's going on? And this is in Spanish. We're Argentine, and we're talking Spanish. I go, hey, Dad, who's this? He goes, oh, I have an artist downstairs that I'm working with. And he's looking at me with this kind of concern. Instead of going, yeah, I'm working with this, he's like, yeah, I have somebody downstairs I'm working with. I go, oh, cool. I noticed that there was a bicycle down there. Oh, yeah, she brought a kid. I went, oh, okay. I go, what's wrong? He goes, I think she's sick. I go, why? I go, and this is 1990 or 91. I go, why? And he goes, and she has no hair? And I go, Dad, what is her name? And he goes, no me recuerdo, es Sunudi. I go, Dad, Sinead O'Connor. Ah, sí. That is such
great.
because he didn't know. The same thing happened with Toby Keith. Who's Toby Keith? What's the Toby Keith? All his friends are like going, "Are you kidding me? You're doing his album?" I don't know. I got to put down.
He's just doing some work. He's just doing some arrangement work.
Absolutely awesome. Mental. Okay, I don't know how we just purged some of my life into this, but so as you were moving forward. I'm going to edit that whole thing out.
I don't know. It's pretty great. I think people will be stoked to find out about your background. It's pretty interesting stuff.
It's a crazy story. It's either that or I could have been a stripper my whole life. But
that would be good too.
Those pictures are going to come up on the internet one day. Okay, so so now you're starting to move forward. You're absorbing music from the video games. You're now have your drum kit. You already had exposure to other instruments because they left it around, like they literally brought a little studio into your house.
Yeah.
And you had the guitars there. When was it that you actually started spending more time and focusing on guitar work?
Sorry, you just cut out there.
Are you still there?
You were saying when I spent more time doing what?
You starting to focus on guitars.
Okay, so what happened was I went to university, which, that's a whole thing I've talked about a few times. But I went because that's what you do, not because I really knew what I wanted to do. So I was basically skipping classes and just doing music and learning to record in my bedroom. But playing drums was basically impossible there. You couldn't practice drums there. Right. And I was like, well, I could practice guitar. So I was like, well, maybe I would focus a bit more on guitar. And I was also getting more and more into Dream Theater, and that's where I discovered Meshuggah and stuff like that. So I was like, all right, I'll just try to be John Petrucci. And I was getting into like guys like Alan Holdsworth and people like that. Yeah.
Out of any influence you can pull out of the wind in music, it's Holdsworth, Petrucci. I mean, come on.
Well, it was because I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be the best. You learn very quickly that's not going to happen.
All right,
it was like I'm gonna aim high. I'm gonna aim high because these guys are like the heroes, And I love them for their. And actually it was then I like first got word of a guitarist by the name of Guthrie Govan, who like,
There's
also,
another one, right?
Right? So the bar was set high. The bar was set very high. I kind of had this understanding, like, I'm not going to be at that level. But maybe if I learn some of their solos or learn some of their stuff, I can get in their headspace and understand where they're coming from, which totally didn't work. But, I don't
know. That last solo you just did on your last bit there had some really wide influence there. So
yeah, but it's the kind of thing where you're taking a little bit, but you're also accepting that these guys are on a different level, and
you have to, or it'll haunt you forever.
Yeah, and I sort of quickly realized I'm not going to be the best guitarist. I'd rather just be a guitarist. So I settled for that.
Yeah, I'll bet you the chat is about to light up right now by you saying, I'm not the best.
No, I'm a very, very mediocre guitarist. I've been over this many times, but I'm over it. I've accepted this. It's a utilitarian thing. I see it more as like it's a means to an end. Because I like to compose. It's just a way. It's the most efficient way for me to get my ideas out most of the time. But and I like guitar-based music, or I like to write guitar-based music. Mm-hmm. But all this stuff kind of shifted to where it was like I was approaching this stuff, and getting into Dream Theater and John Petrucci and stuff like that, approaching it more as a guitarist. Whereas the guitar was much more of a support instrument. Now it's more interactive, or even a lead instrument at times, as opposed to drums. And I think because I had an understanding of drums, and because I was starting to mess around with some like drum programming software, I was now able to sort of craft the elements of a song. Because for bass, I would take a guitar and on a clean channel and just pitch it an octave down, and now I didn't need a bass guitar. I couldn't afford a bass guitar. Sure. So that worked, and I was like, cool, I could craft sort of the sonic palette of a song now, and I could do it on my own at any time on headphones and not bother anyone. So that's where I started to focus on that, and that's where maybe not even realizing I was starting to focus more on composition, because before you're focusing on a drum beat or you're focusing on a guitar riff, but now I was starting to mess with arrangements, and I always found this came kind of naturally to me. Like, it was always a very logical, well, if this is it, then wouldn't it be nice if this came, and I always liked the parts to interact with each other. I always appreciated music where there was a flow to it, and things were so logical. So this is that part of my life where unknowingly I started to just work on those chops. And I remember I was recording on my computer, and I was like, man, like, it doesn't need to sound good. As long as I can sort of get demo quality without having to pay anyone else, that's great. But then once you get there, you're like, well, I wonder how good I could get this to sound. So I started like work on engineering stuff, but very lightly, because I probably could have like read a few books and saved myself years of heartache. But again, I don't like to read the manual. I just like to jump in and do the hard way.
Turn the knob. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, but that's literally what I did. And I did a lot of really dumb things, but then I also did some things I think maybe other people wouldn't have thought to do, or like it was kind of unique, and it was just, oh, this is getting me a result that I like, so I did it. And then also started to learn from friends and whatever, like, oh, this is how they do it, oh, maybe I should try this or that. There were a lot of forums. I was friends with a lot of guys that were doing bedroom producing, and they were sort of elevating the game, because I thought they were all way more talented than me and doing way better songwriting, production, arrangements, and all that. So that was like, I was like, oh God, like I suck compared to these guys. I gotta really like work. I gotta work for it, and it kept me kind of fired up to keep at it and try to just keep up with these guys who are just like, you know,
but I think that's
magnitude
really
more talented.
I think that's a really good thing. Look, I'm going to be 61 soon, and you know, I've kind of refallen in love with my guitar because of the journey I've been on with that, you know, my Decomposer Lounge, and listening to bands such as yourself, The Chugging, Tool, all kinds of different influences, and still yet, I think we share our same feelings about how good of guitar players we are and stuff like that. I think that thing about listening to Halsworth, Govan, Petrucci, or any of the master shredders, even the younger guys, even I'm enamored with the ability of Tim Henson's technicality and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he is just an absolute. What I love about, you know, actually, what I love about both of your journeys, Polyphia and Periphery. Did I do that? Was that right? Polyphia and Periphery.
Polyphia.
Try that,
Periphery
bro.
and Polyphia.
Okay, bro. I just want to make sure I wasn't all sped on this. Okay. Is that both of you, you and your band members, and I want to emphasize that. You know, I think a lot of people, when they think of Polyphia, they think of Tim, and maybe if they think of Periphery, they may think of you as the founder. But without a doubt, the ensemble of the musicians that express, even if you write every note for them, is a whole different world, because your musicians, the musicians that are part of the end game, are putting in their own feel into what they're playing. You know, but I think what I love about Polyphia and Periphery is that there is a pushing forward and moving forward without any regard necessarily, and taking more chances to, let's say, placating a genre or an audience of that nature. Am I saying that right? It's like, you know how to take care of the people that you are performing for, but at the same token, like that little jazz section you did in this last cut, I mean, wow.
I would say I got some advice very, very long time ago that kind of stuck with me, which was, write the music you want to write, but play the songs people want to hear you play. So live will tend to kind of cater to the songs that get the best crowd reaction. But when it comes to writing an album, we're not thinking about anything. I'll tell you what it is, man. When I started in college and kind of through until now, writing is just something that's enjoyable. It's just something I enjoy doing, and it in kind of the same way that, like, when I got the drum set, it wasn't I have a drum set, therefore I'm going to be a drummer. It was, I like playing drums. I like writing. I've written probably the majority of things I've written no one will ever hear. You know, it's just going to stay on my hard drive and die someday. So
bury it with you in, you know, the end days.
There's kind of this idea that, like, oh, the output is the end product, but for me the process is the end product, and the output is the byproduct. So I like writing with my best friends. I like writing with my guys, and it's fun, and you get in this flow state, and it's exciting. And the byproduct of that is that we end up with this album that we're proud of, you know. But we're never really thinking about what people want, and we're not even trying to be original. People say, you know, like how are you original? It's like, I don't care about being original. I think it's, I'm going to be blunt and say I think it's a little stupid to care about being original, because, you know, it's such a subjective thing that no matter how original you are, someone will say you're not being that original
forever.
But if you don't care about it, I can always tell you I had fun, you know? And I could always tell you that it was a satisfying experience. It was a great experience, or it was an experience that I'll never forget. So I don't care about being original at all. Like, if you think it's original, great. If you think it's, you know, a derivative and we're just a Meshuggah ripoff, this or that, I don't care. Like, that's great. It really doesn't bother me. It doesn't really interact with the why of why I do this.
Do you get heat for that Meshuggah ripoff thing?
Oh yeah. I mean, people, but you know, even calling it heat would make it sound like it bothers me. Like I'm like, yeah, they're my favorite band. Like, of course I sound like them, and I'll do stuff that that the solo in Wildfire is a shameless Frederick Thorndahl ripoff. It is shameless. That's not even an interpretation. That whole section just sounds like something that Meshuggah would do, and it put a smile on my face, and I loved it. That's the only reason that it would be that way, and it's not like an inside joke. It's not it just brought me joy, and it's not original. It's the most unoriginal thing in the world. It's literally lifting that band's style, but I have no shame about it because I love it. You know, it's something I adore, and Meshuggah is one of my favorite bands. Frederick Thorndahl is one of my favorite guitarists on the planet. So yeah, like, call it like honoring him or a tribute or whatever.
I was just about to say, I think that's the highest honor that you can, you know, pay somebody is, you know, the conversation that we're having, the conversation that you're having also within your soul and your mind and your creativity is, you know, I could see that you're lit, and it brings you joy to represent that these are the shoulders of the giants that I stood on. To get to where I'm at, and you know what, I can't be more excited to say, hey, listen, I kind of lifted this, changed a couple things, but it's to pay tribute to, like, oh my God, this is like, thank you, mahalo, and let's do it.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing with Nobuo. So many melodic things. It's just like, like, this is what I think Nobuo would have done, you know. And it just makes me happy. Like, it's like, I'm glad that I have these influences. Not all the influences are that direct either. There's a lot of bands or artists I'm into where it's just, they get me fired up. So I won't do anything that sounds like them. I'm just like, I'm pumped, you know? But I, like, originality, I don't think has ever factored into what I do because it's just such a boring pursuit to me.
I don't think I've ever heard anything so honest in my life. That was such a pleasure to hear.
I want to be clear. If you care about originality, I don't want to say that it's stupid for you. Like, go for it. You know, it just doesn't add up in my head. It never made sense, and it's not a interesting pursuit to me. So I'm just trying to be careful that I'm not like making people be like, well, fuck you if you don't think originality. I like originality. Go and do it. But no, that's never factored in for me.
Well, that was such an honest statement, and also now it's funny you just mentioned that composer, and you have a few more minutes that we can talk about. Okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I want to geek out a little bit more now and really focus in on some of your orchestral compositions and your skill set on this. So now, what was the name of that song that when I very first heard you guys on the Decomposer Lounge, when I just goobered over that intro that was all orchestral arranged?
Is it Reptile, the 16-minute long one?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm listening to that going, all right, this guy is seasoned. He's got skills, influence. He's arranging these string sections or these things with what I call orchestral skill. So a lot of times, like, my father made a really good living in Hollywood being an orchestrator, which you know what that is. And for those who are here that don't know what that is, the difference between an orchestrator and a composer is, especially in the era of MIDI, is a lot of composers would structure things on MIDI, like do a string section and do this whole thing, but then you cannot translate that into a live orchestra because things won't work. And my father was that guy.
Yeah.
You know, he's got an IMDb page. He's got about 15 films that he's done.
It's a very, very important job. Very important job, that.
Absolutely. My question to you is, to get to the point when you wrote that orchestral arrangement on Reptile, where was it that you're with the drums, you're doing your thing, you're starting to record in your studio, now you have to kind of lean back into your keyboard skills because now you're most likely starting your writing process, orchestrating.
It's all this.
Yeah. No, but I mean, you're still playing the parts with the keyboard though, right? Like, for instance, if it's
clicking in with the mouse.
Wow.
Yeah, no. So I'll explain how this all happened. When I went to university, I had a gaming computer, and it happened to be the time that you could start to record music. So like I said, I was demoing music by myself. You just couldn't do that before. And a company that was just starting out called TuneTrack, we're now a very big company. They were putting out a product called Drum Kit from Hell, which was at the time very realistic sounding drums. And like I had I couldn't afford the Line 6 pod, but I had a Behringer V amp, which was the knockoff. So the same an amp modeler for like $120 or whatever, and now I could just plug that into my computer and get guitar tones, right? So now I was completely self-reliant, and I could just craft these things. And again, it was another door that opened. It's like, all right, we're gonna go in and explore everything. You're not going to hang out with your friends. You're not going to have a girlfriend. You're not going to do anything.
Shower 3 times a week.
Yeah, like showers. Who's heard of them? I was just so enamored, right? Come around like 2015, 2016, I think I was getting like, there's like a bunch of things converging in my life to where I was a bit of a dark place and feeling like kind of creatively unfulfilled, I feel a little bit like now Periphery and my projects is just kind of like, oh, here we go at the computer, guitar, program drums, and it's just variations on a theme, and it's just kind of like all the same elements. And I start to notice, like I'm hearing some things and people are like, yeah, that's virtual orchestra. And I was like, what? That sounds real. That sounds real to me. And I started doing some research, and I realized there's companies like Orchestral Tools and Spitfire and like Sound Iron that are like putting out these products that you can on your computer make an orchestra happen. And it will sound convincing. And it was that same feeling that I had in the early 2000s where I was like, wait, I can make music by myself? Now I can orchestrate by myself. And it'll sound convincing. It won't sound like crappy strings. There's legato articulations, and there's divisi, and you have all the articulations. I'm starting to learn about, like, I'm starting to watch YouTube videos on how to compose for these instruments, and not even just how to compose. What is realistic? Oh, so like you're a horn player, like when would you take a breath? And they're like, oh yeah, like play a note and like kind of breathe out, and like, well,
wow, you did this all on your own. You just dove in head first. You lifted the hood and you just went, let's get in.
No manuals. I'm like, there's YouTube, there's all this stuff, and just playing around, just playing around with these libraries. I'm just playing around with like the staccato and the spiccato articulations. I'm like, oh my god, this sounds like a violin, like, and understanding how to pan these things in the orchestra, looking at charts and all these things. Like,
good for you.
Okay, yeah, because I would have just put everything in the center. It's like, oh no, like, like, and it like you realize the orchestra is kind of imbalanced, like bass to treble and all that, and like, but I was like, wow, you can start, and then starting to understand like the difference between like sort of cinematic composition and orchestral composition and trailer composition, and like how one might approach this, and getting on the forums like VI control. It just reminded me of like just getting into all this stuff again, and it was just like, oh my god, here's a door, and I don't know anything, and that's amazing. I love that, because now I can learn everything, and just experimenting and just sometimes posting stuff, sometimes showing people. And then the goal was like, I want to see if I can get this to the point where it sounds realistic, where if someone heard this, they'd be like, oh, is that played? Is that an orchestra?
You see, that's the thing, and I think that's the one thing I said about listening to Reptile, that first intro, was the fact that you can, for myself, I've been doing this since The Last Supper, so I can kind of detect when a keyboardist is doing arrangements on an orchestral, be it Spitfire, whatever the case is. I'm an old school guy because of my branding legacy, but I use the East-West.
East-West, I was going to say, you probably use East-West. Yeah,
I come back from those days, like, pre-RMX,
They were great, but they kind of got leapfrogged by this newer generation stuff, and that play engine is very
antiquated,
problematic. Yeah,
and I say that with respect because I still use them in that, but what I end up doing in my compositions, I mean, I haven't done a film for a couple of years, so it's been a while since I've blown it out, but I actually am going to do something this year. Maybe I'll have you come in and play in that salad bar, where I actually will still use the East-West sounds, but now I'm going to layer in a little bit of the dynamics of, let's just say, Hollywood Studios or something like that. I'll lay that in if I'm doing like a really quick
I do
run.
that like crazy. I layer libraries like you wouldn't believe.
And even every once in a blue moon, depending on it, if it's a very heavy scene where I'm really trying to kind of do a tug of war of a pseudo mono instrument. Let's say I'm doing a melody with an oboe that's doing an answer back with a bassoon, and then I want to pull you in dynamics left and right. So I use that hard left and right, just string sound, not pulling, section at a time. I'll actually use in Omnisphere. There are some couple of light strings, they're synthy, but they're just perfect to sit right behind to give you that long...
I think I know the patch you're talking about. I think I know is that Adagio Espressivo?
Yes,
that
this
one.
guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew that. I know that exact patch.
But I'll put that in there, not trying to be necessarily organic and authentic to the sound, but to the effect.
No, but it
that
fills
I
it out.
give.
It fills it out. I'll use that too. I'll totally use that too. But it's not for realism. It's just to fill out the sound. Or sometimes if you need it under a big metal mix, and that was a big challenge, is like trying to mix these two together.
That was
and
my
then
next
you realize
question.
like realistic strings aren't always the best to cut through a mix, because distorted guitars are they just destroy everything.
Yeah, they're hot at the start. Whereas even if, this was great, because I was going to ask you this question. Yeah, okay, we'll stay on the subject matter. I think one of the most difficult things I've ever encountered is when I have to do, even if I'm using the most brash spiccato, sounds and stuff like that, and I'm doing some, dare I say, chugging work and stuff like that, I lean a little more towards the orchestral mix aspect of it than the guitar, which I find is such a difficult thing. When I listen to Steve Vai and he has the orchestra behind him, or certain people that utilize these big orchestral, support systems and songs and stuff like that, there's always that nanosecond lag between the live performers and then the punchiness of a guitar and stuff like that.
I actually compensate for that.
Yeah, well, we're men.
On the
We learn
track
for compensate.
Been doing it for decades, man. Expert in compensating right here.
All right.
So yes, in the DAW, there's a control to change your penis size from 3 inches to. Anyway, no.
Just right over the shoulder. Just lay it.
So it's always been. No, you can literally, like, the samples always have a little bit of space, and what's annoying is that every instrument will have a different amount. So I'll literally like sit there with a click and like adjust it, so maybe like the V1 spiccato will be like 30 milliseconds off. So on that track you can do a 30 millisecond offset, so it starts at the right time. If I have it mixed in with instruments, you have to do that. Yeah, because it'll always come in later and it'll be noticeable.
What is your DAW? I'm sorry.
Cubase.
Oh, okay, me too. All right, cool beans.
Yeah. The only the MIDI is like unbelievable, and the drum programming and all that. It's
whole different podcast there.
Whole different podcast, but yes, and a lot of composers do like Cubase because it's just very friendly for that. But yeah, like I'll say, like if you listen, it's very rare, especially like moving on, that I will have a full orchestra going and the full mix, because it's such a compromise. So I'll have elements going, and I'll have elements I think can cut through well, but generally speaking, if I'm going to do orchestral stuff, it'll be like kind of a section. So we get Reptile's a good example. Everything's coming in, and then we have the drums come in, but by the time the full band comes in, pretty much those elements stop, and then they'll come in like as a break later. And that's sort of what I discovered was probably one of the better ways to do it, because you can actually hear the damn thing. If you're doing it over the mix, it almost doesn't need to sound that realistic, and you need to resort to libraries that are a bit more that just seem to fit your mix better to cut through, and it's less about realism, it's just more about making space. And then everything becomes kind of compromised. It's really challenging. And metal and rock mixes with all the distortion are very unfriendly to other sounds. Yeah, they're unfriendly to themselves. So anything else that you add is just taking up space. When you're doing a purely orchestral mix, it's like, wow, all the frequencies. This is great, But like, it's kind of interesting, and that's its own sort of technical challenge there. And that's probably affected even the way that I'll tend to arrange that stuff into the song, so that you can hear the beautiful orchestral stuff and not have it be sort of like ripped apart by the other elements of the mix.
And another thing is too, is I think certain companies that are, I watch, it almost seems like every other week there's a new bit of software coming out, saying they're the best strings and all that sort of stuff. But what I do notice in their sample libraries and stuff when I listen to them is that a lot of these companies are now evolving in their formula of sampling, building their sounds to affect maybe a little more towards the metal musician and stuff. So in other words, that string it's a string, let's just say it's a marcato or something, and it pops, but they may have tweaked it a little hotter on the high end and done a little bit of shaping on the top to give it that more bite that might meet the edge of a guitar.
I think there's just different flavors. Now there's so many libraries that everyone's got to sell you the new library and make it different from. So a good example is LA Scoring Strings. I'm a big fan of that library. It's very raw.
I got that.
But you hear the strings, and that I'll use oftentimes because it just cuts through. It's a very dry. People used to bitch about that library and like, oh, it's too dry and it's too raw. But then like I'll layer that with something else, and like that part will cut through. Like the spiccato in that is like really, really aggressive, which I like. And I haven't found another library that really does it as aggressively. Maybe some of the Audio Imperia stuff is very aggressive because they aim their stuff at like trailers, and that's like big and bombastic stuff,
Right, exactly.
It's not very John Williams. It's more like like movie trailers.
Well, it's kind of like how you guys in your companies with Get Good and what are the name of all your brands in your company?
Oh, so Get Good Drums. We do like drum software. We do guitar cabinet IRs, and we do like some plugins, compressors and stuff. I've got Horizon Devices, which is my pedal company.
But I mean, you guys, even with Get Good Drums and stuff, I mean, the truth be told, it seems like a lot of the shaping of the sounds were based on we're going to focus on the metal.
Yes and no. Like I think that's where we started to some degree, but we won't have enough stuff to where you could do any style of music. And the main, we have this One Kit Wonder series, which is very much like, hey, I don't really, and you should have more. Like it's like it's like I don't really want to worry about the engineering. I just want to get to writing. Cool. Well, this will just sound good. Don't worry about it. But then our main kits, which will be sort of themed. Like, let's say Invasion is very sort of like death metal or metal, but you could use it for anything because it's actually captured very sort of neutrally. But it's more like these are the drums and the sizes and the tunings that we chose that might be more appropriate for that. But I've heard people use that kit in a funk context. Right. It's great. So those, like the main kits, the non-One Kit Wonder kits, are captured in a way where you can process it however. They're very sort of just captured very clean, and then you could process to be metal or rock or whatever, really. And I've heard such a range from those kits. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, I think for me, there's also there was a period where if I'm doing a project that means something, meaning like, look, I've written all kinds of music for all kinds of people, different prices. If my heart's in it, I'm giving you 100%. There's some jobs that you just go, okay, the sounds coming out of the module are good enough, and it's also, let's say, for radio, commercials, and that all gets hidden with announcers and effects and stuff. Unfortunately, there's a saying as old composers, from the 80s and the 90s doing production music, good enough for TV, good enough for radio, But I get it. But the beauty of the modules that you guys put out and today's modules and stuff is they are plug and go, plug and play and go for me. But I still, believe it or not, because of my own old school mentality of sitting behind a console, I'm visualizing the room and the whole thing. There is one, I think it's Native Instrument has this one drum thing where I think it's Studio Drummer or something, where they actually give you compression and EQing and stuff per instrument and stuff that I still have tendency to use when I'm going to more fusion, jazzier sounds and stuff like that. But I've learned to completely run to Get Good Drums for all of the stuff that I've been doing.
Well, the way I do that is rather than using the compression and EQ and all that's built into Contact, which is pretty limiting, I route that out, multi-out into Cubase, and then use all the plugins I like, and then you get way better quality doing it that way. Right. And we have tutorials on that, like on the page. Like I show, like I do quite a lot of like weird stuff, like because then you can start to get pretty like with metal, I always say it's always about managing. Like you're always just managing disaster. When you get into electronic stuff and whatever, like you get to use all the frequencies. Here you're just managing. You're trying, and everything's fighting for space. It's like a fist fight between the instruments. So like there's little tricks, like how now I've started to do like really weird stuff, like I'm multi-band side chaining that one frequency that the kick drum and the bass guitar are fighting over, you know, like around 200 hertz or like 100, because it like, and all it does is just make it sound cleaner, you know, like it's like, well, you know, for this split second the kick drum's gonna get priority over these frequencies at this time, you know, like just little tricks, because that's what you have to do in metal to get everything to just cut through. So you find these techniques and you just kind of adapt them, but it's such an unfriendly style. And then anytime I do anything electronic, I'm like, oh man, like, wow, I can use so much more range out of everything. And even the distortion is all perfect. Sounds great, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing. That battle, that tone battle, that thing that we can go through as engineers and so on and so forth. You know, obviously if you're doing, for myself, if I'm doing a piece that's strictly off of modules and stuff like that, I'm not using any guitar, I'm not doing necessarily, and even if I am using a drum module, you know, like yours, and I'll drag in something just to let it sit there, the end sounds of these modules are so clean and so crispy that you find yourself that you have a lot more room in the tones to play with other arrangements.
Yep.
So sometimes for myself, I got to watch how much more I'm adding, because tonally I can say, oh, there's rooms here, there's a lot of room here between 5 and 7K for something to be kind of, then you pick and choose on where you want those tones to come in a song or something. And then, you know, I just recently got really involved in ethereal ambient tracks by accident.
Oh yeah.
And so I have this, I used to think it was ASMR, but I realized it's not an ASMR channel, but I have a channel that I started for myself where I just loop these pads and these beautiful floating things that I use for me to go to sleep. And now it's actually starting to gain traction. But it's so impeccably wonderful to call it 4 or 5 different patches, and the clarity in the tones and the management of the levels and stuff in there, that I could sit there and it gives me less stress while I'm composing, to do things like not have to worry about thinking about that later, how that'll work, that I'll be able to call up this tone or this patch, this patch, this patch.
Yeah, absolutely.
And get to work and start doing things. So, but just, you know, I don't want to hang up too much of your time here. I know we're fully geeking out. I mean, we still have a little time. We can have some fun. But I want to, because I do want to end up with Periphery and what you guys are doing. You know, I'll be towards the end of this. But I want to circle one more time back into the video game things, because I think something that is, to me, a wonderful trajectory that you're on. And I want to ask you, do you find yourself soon wanting to get yourself into the video game composition world? I mean, you have seemingly.
So that's an interesting question. The logical answer is yes, but I have a lot of friends in that world, and I know a lot of things about that world, and it's just as tough, if not tougher, to break into that than it is to become. It's already the fact that I'm where I'm at, and that Periphery is where it is an impossibility, and it's an incredible lottery ticket that we got lucky with, you know. So I appreciate that, and how rare that is, and how lucky we got. And I almost feel like it's kind of naive or arrogant to be like, yeah, so I'm gonna do that with video game composition. I've gotten some you know, little things thrown my way from having friends in it, but I know that to do that, I would basically have to chase it with everything I've got. That would have to be my full-time thing. You know, that is the respect that it would deserve, and it wouldn't really leave me time with much else, and it might even interfere with my ability to do my companies, do the band, or whatever, right? Just to be able to get my foot in the door and probably fail at it. So it's a very difficult thing. It's a very difficult thing to break into, you know? I'm not talking just even on a level of talent. I'm just saying, like, the luck. So much of this is luck, as you know, and as anyone in the industry realizes, it's not everyone's talented. It's like so much of this is down to luck. So if it ever happens, great, but it's not something that I can afford to pursue with as aggressively as someone who's like starting out and being like, in the same way that I was like, I'm gonna start a band. I would almost need to be like, I'm gonna be a composer, and go with that and make that my full-time thing. So if an opportunity comes my way, of course I would take it. Of course, I would love to do that. I mean, that would be a dream come true. But I just respect the work that it takes, and I don't see it as something that one does on a whim. I see it as like, this is a career path that you throw your whole ass at and pray for the best. And I could only hope that I'd be so lucky as to get more opportunities in the future.
Dude, that was the most wonderful thing. I mean, most what's the word I'm looking for? Because I look for words all the time because they don't come in anymore like they used to. But that was such a genuine thing that you were saying, and I was just like if I was a gaming what do they call them, dev or software developer, and I heard that, I'd go, we got to get the respect that you gave the process was wonderful. How when you started saying it, and that is so powerful for you to have recognized that the authenticity, the power, the respect that it takes to actually put in that type of energy into a game. I don't know. I would never know. I'm not suited for game composition. I mean, I'm sure I could do tracks, but I'm not really suited for it, I don't think. But that is a unique beast in of itself to become a composer for a game. I interviewed Marty O'Donnell. I got his podcast on my channel, and listening to his journey and what he went through with Halo, and then of course some of the things that we've learned. And me just on the outside of the snow globe of today's composers, the challenges that Mick Gordon went through with his situation that unfortunately went public. I think he'll be on a podcast with me here in the next month or two.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, once again, it would be more of a glow of his skills in talking about his situation, because inevitably I think he'll have some pearls of wisdom, to yield.
But he's an incredible composer. Incredible.
Absolutely, and even his music to Doom was my very first really actual exposure to his skill set, because I did a review of Doom on my World channel, and I was like, what is this? Who is this? And the incredible textures he put on that, but I'm sure that he is probably steeped in many different levels of abilities in composing. But that's the style that was asked, or that he did for that, which is, has to do with the process of what the developers or the producers want to match music with whatever play is, or in the case of movie.
Yeah.
And I think people forget about that too, which is going to lead me into something else that we mentioned in our little tech talk that we did a couple days ago, is the fact that in certain conversations, gaming composers may not have the same respect, let's say, as Hollywood composers. And I think that exists in any walk in life, in any creative conversation, that there's always, well, they're not as good, or they may not be as. I find in my journey listening to music, only 3 or 4 months of OSTs, that couldn't be further from the truth. I've heard some of the best music I've ever heard on these video games that would rival. If that was really truly a real serious conversation, I'd be the first one saying, no, you're wrong.
I think, as we were kind of talking about, like, I think that the discourse is changing. It's as video games are becoming one of the most popular art forms and being recognized as an art form as a result, and as more and more people are getting into them and are enjoying them on an artistic level, it's starting to become undeniable that not only are these great composers, but that they shouldn't be considered any less than a film composer or just a regular composer of any kind, really. And it's really more on the merit of their work. So it's a lot of people are being exposed to these OSTs or whatever, maybe even people who aren't gamers, who are like, well, wow, like, this is incredible, and this literally wouldn't exist if it weren't for a video game. So
absolutely,
I think that as much as that is true, I do see it changing for the better. And you know, guys like Mick Gordon are a very good example, because I think sometimes the public kind of they'll be like, music is good, the music is great in the game, but they won't associate a name to it. But people know who Mick Gordon is because of Doom. One of my favorite things I always tell people is like, oh, did you hear the new Mick Gordon album comes with a free video game? Like, it's which I love, you know, and
excuse me,
and it's it sort of shows that like now people are paying attention to who the composer is and what their style is. And on a completely different and secondary note, I'm glad that he in a way made metal a bit more acceptable in mainstream, because it's a very legitimately heavy and metal soundtrack.
Massive.
That you know, and it's down tuned. He's playing 8-string guitars. It's a lot of the stuff we're talking about, you know.
Right.
And now this is something that, you know, on some sort of pop culture level, like people are aware of. That's really, really cool. That's great for me. So it's good to have him like sort of repping on both sides. And I think all that sort of ties together. If that hadn't been so unique compared to like what most people would consider a soundtrack for a video game, maybe it wouldn't have stood out as much, but it stood out, and they associate the name with it, and it's doing a lot of good for metal. So it's a win-win-win, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, you know, you also had a lot to do with that too, if I may say so my damn self. Can you tell me a little bit about the process of getting that one track into Halo? How did that whole, or was that you just did a
No, just got lucky. So here's what happened. My buddies were hired by 343. So Microsoft took over. They were doing the anniversary edition. They were hired by 343. My buddies Brian Trifon and Brian Lee White, who have a production company called Finishing Move, and they do a lot of work. Like they just did Callisto Protocol. They were doing Flight Simulator. Like these guys are big.
Wow.
Guys. This was one of the big things at the time. It was a big thing for them. It was like kind of like, if you guys get this right, you'll have more work, and they got it right. They did great, and they got more work.
They got more work, yeah.
But they're good friends of mine. They're really nice guys. Like Brian Trifon has this one of my favorite electronic projects of all time called Triphonic, which I recommend you check out. And it turned out like they dug my band too, so we just became friends over that, and then later they got this composition job, and what happened was there were these songs by Incubus and Breaking Benjamin, I believe, in the original game that were licensed, but to relicense them would be a lot of money. So they're like, we can't afford that, and they were like, we could compose, or maybe we could hire Misha to do it. He can get these songs done real quick. I was like, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Sure. What's funny is like they're like, we can't offer you a lot of money, which, you know, by music industry standards was a ton of money, but by their standards was nothing. And it was still like very, very little, like relative to like licensing money, and they were just gonna buy it outright, so no royalties or anything. So very simple. And that's how I got to do it. They were like, we need someone to turn around these songs pretty quick. Here's some footage of what you'll be writing to. Here's the vibe. And I did it. It was my first time doing it. I had a lot of fun doing it. They're friends of mine, so it was easy to get everything together, you know. And
great.
But it just sort of fell in my lap. And I always use it as an example of like sort of like networking, because I think people always consider networking to be this thing where like it's like, hey big shot, like it's me, can you help me out, you know, can we be friends? But in my experience, it's always been more of these lateral things. It's like we were just friends because we were friends and we respected each other and we just got along. Then he got a good opportunity. They got a good opportunity. They needed some help, and they were able to help me out. And so that was networking. It's just I happened to be friends with these guys, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's the kind of thing that Misha could probably turn around pretty easily." So they hit me up, and that's how that sort of fell into my lap. And after I did that, people were like, "Oh, you're gonna compose more for music for video games?" I'm like, "Yeah, if you want to." Hit me up. Hit me up, I'll do it.
Sure.
But you know, I also respect like how much work it is, and there's so much more to being a video game composer than like writing a song to a video game. So
yeah, it seems to be. I think one of the things that I learned from Marty when I did the podcast, and then we briefly, just nanosecond in that podcast, talk about Mick and his skill set and what he's going through. I started doing a little more research on the process that Mick was going through in a very unique, challenging journey with that last whole Doom thing, you know, having to write without seeing and stuff like that. And I was like, going, that's for me, that's mind numbing. It's like almost if a director, if that last movie I did a couple of years ago, if the director said, well, here's the script.
Yeah. Oh God, no, I wouldn't be able to do that. And then
you just write to that, and it's just so uncanny what Mick was able to process and put out that most likely, and I'm assuming, but may have been a very powerful influence getting the music first while developing.
Maybe work the other way around. Yeah, maybe we actually shape the game.
Yeah, because my very first quote-unquote big job, I used to do, there was a small window when I used to do all the music for the national spots for a vacuum company called Dirt Devil.
Oh,
and,
wow.
Yeah, and I got my first gig. This is so funny because it's comparable to what I just said. First to your network thing, I failed epic at networking in Hollywood. And my brother's a pro golf instructor in Studio City where all the stars and directors were. And hey, you should talk to this guy. And he goes, no, I don't want to go walk up to that guy and pretend I want to know how his kids are doing only because I know he can help me maybe get something. Listen to my demo, please. That I couldn't do any of that. You know, plus these guys already had a stable of composers, you know. I said, well, just in case Danny Elfman decides not to do your $50 million movie, I'm here. Oh yeah, we're going to use you. You know, I was like, but my very first job, that commercial job that I'm about to lead into, I got because every Tuesday night I'd sit next to this guy who'd order a pizza at a bar close by my house, great restaurant called Michelli's, and he'd have a pizza, bottle of wine. He's a loudmouth, funny, sportsy guy. Just so happened that somebody called at the bar, knew I was at the bar. This is pre-cell phone days. Hey, Geebz, this is for you. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I can get you a cassette tape of that. Yeah, no problem. Okay, bye. And the guy goes, cassette tape? What do you do? I go, well, I'm trying to break into, I've been doing music libraries, but I'm trying to break into commercials and stuff. And he goes, what? I go, yeah, I got this cassette tape here. And he goes, you know that's what I do, right? I go, shut the fuck. You know what the fuck are you making? Because we are always popping on each other for listening to sports. Fuck you. Hey, you fucking, you know, what the fuck?
Oh, and it's the first time you actually discussed like what it is that you do. Yeah, it's kind of funny, huh?
I don't walk around with the big flag saying composer for hire, you know.
No, you wouldn't. But dude, this is how it happens. And you know what? Because you had a rapport, he's like, well, I might as well. This is the thing people don't understand is so many, like, how many times someone has like tried to like be a guitar tech or something for us on tour, and they're like, I have a diploma from Berkeley. I'm like, dude, we get hired because someone's like, oh yeah, they're cool, you know. Like, I know they're cool, I can vouch
and they could do
them. And they could do it. I know that they could do it. Like, it's just like, it's like so much. People would be disappointed if they saw how much of these things just come down to like the whims of the moment, or like, I know this guy, he seems legit, and you could have all the talented people in the world, but like right place, right time. That's why I say so much of this is luck.
It's so funny you should say that because I taught my daughters, my stepdaughters, is that luck comes at the crossroads of opportunity and preparedness.
Sure.
And that's what happened to me with this guy, Doug McGowan. Great guy, loved him, loudmouth punching. But then what ended up happening was it all had to go wrong. The composer he used is a composer by the name of Paul Merkovich. Famous. He's the guy who's been doing the voice. He's the music director of music for that. He just got hired at the time when I got hired. He got hired to be Cher's music director on the road. Oh. So Paul couldn't do the work. So these guys were going, yeah, we were just starting to look for composers. Listen, we can't give you, it's almost like the same story as yours. We can't give you the same kind of demo money that we would give Paul, but it's because you're new and all that, but we'll give you a couple dollars. Could you kind of map out something? You know, this is when mocking composition started becoming a thing, when you had to do mock-ups. He gives me storyboard writings. At least I had some visuals of a 30 of a storyboard writing with dialogue. And I wrote this little bit, and I thought, okay, I'm never going to get it. I gave it to Doug. Doug sent it up through the chain, got to the top of the flagpole, and I got the gig, and it changed my life forever. Not because I was out going to parties or meeting the right people, but in that same circumstance that you were talking about. Who are you talking to? And this, and you know,
it never looks like how people expect it to look, and it's always more of like a lateral thing rather than like, oh, like I'm gonna convince this big shot that I'm worth it, you know, like. And like you said, it was just kind of like you guys were just sitting next to each other, and he had his guard down, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
we
they're advertising yourself. It's like, oh, I do that, you know?
Yeah, I knew he did some kind of production because that restaurant Michelli's is right in the armpit of Universal Studios area. So there's a lot of grips and gaffers above the line, below the guy in production people and stuff directly, you know. So it's like, oh, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? It just so happened that, and I knew he did something in commercials, but I didn't bother asking, like in a networking kind of way. He would just come in all dusty after directing some commercials and stuff and have his 2 glasses of wine and he'd order a pizza to take home to his family. So Doug and I, for about 6 months, were just talking shit every Thursday for sports. And then that conversation popped up only because the phone rang at the bar and he overheard me.
Luck, yeah. Yeah.
But the funny thing is about that too is that one of those instances where I dare not match myself or in the same breath as what Mick Jordan had to do with, you know, not seeing any footage whatsoever. But what I also, and hopefully, you know, I'll be able to get Mick on here, is to go through that spotting process is very unique. I don't know anything about the spotting process because for film, you know, spotting is, all right, guys, we're going to take 6 hours of our day. A matter of fact, this was pre-COVID, so we did...
So I'm not familiar with spotting. What is spotting?
So a spotting session is when, if, you know, once I've been hired and everything, or any composer gets hired to do film, you're going to sit down with the director and literally sit down with the director from... There's 2 different types of process. If you get in before pre-production or during pre-production, you kind of are lucky enough to get sometimes dailies sent to you. But there'll be this pre-production meeting, and it'll be like, I'm going to give you a hypothetical. We want this to sound a little bit like a Forrest Gump meets Titanic kind of vibe with instrumentations, and it's going to be this. Okay, so let me get that rinsed in my head. Then what happens is, if you're lucky enough to have that conversation in pre-production, you get to have this relationship with the director, and then once a week they'll send you a hard cut of dailies to kind of warm you up on this scene that we were working on, and then so that you might have a quick conversation with the director, but a very short one because he's in the middle of production. He's not really going to focus too much, in my experience. If you get hired in post-production, like on this last film I did, everything is shot and it's in the can, and they're 90% edited, which you hope they're, you know, locked, but you know, there's always changes being made. And then you just sit there and you watch the film with the director. And in this case, this last film that I did was called The Last Conception. It was not a Bollywood movie, but it was these wonderfully produced film in Hollywood, but it had to do with a family from India that had just moved to the mainland, but found out that their lineage to Buddha. It's a cute film. And I don't mean cute in its worthy. It's just, it was a very fun film to watch and to work on. Very talented actors and writers and stuff. But so my directions was, this is going to have very much flavor of the India style of music, but we also want a little bit of chill step and a little bit of this here and there, and then at certain points we want something very fun and lighthearted, pizzicato strings with a little thing. So what you do is you sit through and you watch the movie from top to bottom, and you okay, here at this establishing scene as it crosses over to this, okay, here she's picking up the phone, she's in a great mood, but now her face drops because she finds out her father's in the hospital. At this point, we need you to lead into the scene, which is going to be about 6 seconds of, and I'm watching it, of transition from her face to her walking with anxiety into the hospital room and seeing her father laying there. And then there's the next cut, which is going to be her face is going to be very distraught, seeing her dad there. So my job is to effectively, as a composer, write a piece that is going to be that. And so that's like 4 or 5 hours of going through that with the director. You map it out, and then all of a sudden you get the movie in your hands and you go to work. And today, opposed to from the days of my father, and a friend of his is a composer, he's still alive actually, Lalo Schifrin, you may have heard of him, but Mission Impossible and that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah.
You know, those days, you met with the director, you wrote the score, and then spent $100,000 on getting the orchestra in front of you, and that's it, ready to go. And so if a score got thrown out, that was a big deal. Nowadays, you have to mock everything up before you get to... You know.
Right.
So you outline the scene, I write my light...
No, but that makes sense. That's really interesting. That's interesting, and it makes a lot of sense that would be like the most efficient way to do that. That's
Yeah,
pretty fascinating, actually.
nowadays what it is like, for instance, that movie did take me through more pop culture, fun Bollywood style writing, all the way to very dark, heavy, pulling scenes. To the last scene was almost a 2-minute bit that had to integrate all of it. So the last thing I just do want to say briefly. So here we are. Periphery has released these 2 singles. You're on your way. What's coming around the corner? Do you have any kind of tours coming up that our friends here should know about? And what's going on?
Yeah, we're touring in March. We're opening for a band called Under Oath, and this really awesome band Loathe is opening the whole thing.
I'm familiar with them. Fantastic.
Yeah, Loathe, I'm very excited to see them live. And we've got a festival in the UK in the summer that we're headlining, but not too much stuff announced, but stuff being worked on.
I can tell by your smile, like you're going, "Whoa, we got stuff."
I can't get yelled at by people, so I think that's all I'm allowed to mention.
Okay, that being said, to close it up, first of all, I can't thank you enough for joining me here. This has been a blast, and I'm sure we could have talked for another couple of hours and just geek out over stuff. I want to thank you for sharing, some new information about your career trajectory and the things you've gone through with me here. So I think since we kind of glided into video games and different things, we were able to talk about different things.
Yeah.
And as far as I'll make sure that I'll put down below all the links for Periphery stuff. I want to also thank you for offering me some Get Good stuff. I almost feel
look
like
at the reminder. Look at the reminder. It's all on camera.
It's all on camera now. No, but I look forward to that because I am a super master geek on that, and we'll talk. We'll catch up offline on that sort of stuff. So everybody here on Twitch, thank you so much. I know we haven't spent a lot of time looking at the comments. I'm definitely going to take a look at that, and I can't thank you guys enough for joining us here. And that being said, we are going to end our stream. Misha, I'm going to quickly chat with you offline after this, but outside of that, I want to thank all of you right now. I'm going to send it off. You guys, thanks for hanging out on Twitch. There will be a re-edit of this for YouTube. So, Misha, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, man.
Okay, guys, we're out of here. Aloha. See you later.